Let's find out if Negan can brutally get you a victory or if he's just a pushover commander. What is up, Commander players? My name is Matt and you're watching Top Commander. So, today's video we're going to be discussing a potential deck tech for the Secret Lair Walking Dead character Negan. Some of these have not been so cut and dry. They've actually taken a minute trying to figure out what to do with each one, honestly. But this one may be a little cut and dry, but we'll have to see what happens with the deck tech. But before we get into all that, if you wish to support this channel, be sure to like, share, and subscribe as always. And if you wish to support this channel directly, be sure to visit patreon.com/topcommander. But without any further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So, Negan the Cold-Blooded. 2 generic, a red, white, and a black. So Mardu colors for a 4/3 legendary creature human rogue. When Negan enters the battlefield, you and target opponent each secretly choose a creature that player controls. Then those choices are revealed and that player sacrifices those creatures. Whenever an opponent sacrifices a creature, you create a treasure token. Okay, so the first part is a bit of a mouthful. So you target one of your opponents, both of you choose a creature on that player's field in secret, and then that player has to sacrifice both creatures. So this one's a little interesting because there's no guarantee that you're going to get 2 creatures. So it kind of depends on the mindset, because if you automatically choose their best creature, they might assume that you're going to choose their best creature, so it would be safe for your opponent to choose the same creature, so you only get 1 sacrifice. However, trying to do some reverse psychology, you choose the second best thing, and they know that you're going to potentially choose the best thing on their field, and hopefully that works out for you and you get 2. But in the end, you really don't know what each other are choosing, so it's kind of a gamble. You at least get 1 sacrifice. As far as if you get that second one, I guess it depends on how you play it. It's a little weird. I'm not too thrilled on that aspect of the card, but the part where whenever an opponent sacrifices a creature, you get to create a treasure token. This part I'm actually more interested in, because it almost seems like you want to force your opponent to sack creatures. I mean, obviously, because the first part of the card has to deal with sacrificing creatures. But that one's not... It's not that great. It really isn't that great on the first line of text. But the second line of text, you can build a deck in a way to control that 100%. You're in Mardu colors, so Mardu Aristocrats is a thing. This could potentially be a Mardu Aristocrats commander. And the fact that every time your opponent has to sack a creature, you're creating treasure tokens. So what kind of cards are you really going to be looking for a deck like this? Forcing your opponent to sack things, of course, takes me immediately to Grave Pact effects. So Grave Pact is an enchantment for 1 and 3 black. Whenever any creature you control is put into any graveyard, each other player sacrifices a creature. Now, if this sounds familiar, Dictate of Erebos is another one. It's 3 generic and 2 black for an enchantment with flash. Whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent sacks a creature. And just to hit home, Butcher of Malakir is another one as well. It's 5 generic and 2 black for a, I believe he's a 5/4 flyer, but he has the same line of text on him. Whenever one of your creatures dies, or if Butcher of Malakir goes to the graveyard, each opponent has to sack a creature. Pretty good. Not a bad way to control the field that way. Definitely in a deck like this, you don't necessarily need a lot of board wipes unless your opponent's out creaturing you somehow. But if you can get these cards going, it's a good way to control the board state. Voltron commanders have a hard time with this. Creature decks may or may not have a hard time with this. It just totally depends on the creature deck itself, how many tokens they can produce at one time. Because typical Aristocrats decks can only sacrifice so many things at one time because they can only produce so much at one time. The downside of Mardu being that you don't have a lot of really great ways to ramp outside of like artifacts. So the fact that Negan does produce treasure tokens to help ramp you kind of goes a long way. So you're basically going to be running the regular sack outlets, pretty much all the regular culprits. Viscera Seer is 1 black for a 1/1 vampire wizard. Sacrifice creature, scry 1. There's a little bit of card advantage for you. Then there's the altars. Both of them are 3-drop artifacts. Ashnod's Altar sacrifices a creature and gives you 2 diamond mana or 2 colorless mana. And Phyrexian Altar allows you to sacrifice a creature to produce 1 mana of any color. So you're going to be using your typical sack outlets in a deck like this. With that being said, you're going to have a graveyard recursion package, but you can't always recur the same creature over and over all the time like this. So at a certain point, you're going to need token generators. Now, there's a lot of different token generators that Mardu will use. I'm only going to go over a couple of them because it's pretty much all the usual stuff. God Eternal Oketra is 3 generic and 2 white for a 3/6 legendary creature zombie god. Has double strike, and whenever you cast a creature spell, you create a 4/4 black zombie warrior creature token with vigilance. So with Oketra, you're creating 4/4 black zombies with vigilance. This is actually really good. Oketra is really, really good for a white commander. And especially if you're using Mardu Aristocrats. But it's every time you cast a creature, so part of your recursion package in Mardu, you're going to find ways to get creatures back on the field from the graveyard or back into your hand. It's typically just the way it goes. Just roll with it, I guess. The last line of text is, when God Eternal Oketra dies or is put into exile from the battlefield, you may put it into its owner's library, 3rd from the top. So Oketra is a little bit difficult to get rid of, needless to say. There's also cards like Zathrid Necromancer. 2 generic and a black for a 2/2 creature human wizard. Whenever Zathrid Necromancer or another human creature you control dies, put a 2/2 black zombie creature token onto the battlefield tapped. So you see where this is going. When you got token generators from creatures coming into play and dying, you can eventually get to a point where you have enough creatures to sack and kill your opponents, or just flood the board and swing in for the win. Which is typically what your Aristocrats deck is going to do, unless it's an Aristocrats deck that is designed to just straight combo off and go infinite. I don't know the infinite combos off the top of my head, so I'm not going to go into too many of those. But, however, a card like Liliana Dreadhorde General is definitely needed for a deck like this. 4 generic and 2 black for a Planeswalker. Comes in with 6 loyalty. Whenever a creature... The static effect is whenever a creature you control dies, draw a card. +1, create a 2/2 zombie token. -4, each player sacrifices 2 creatures. And -9, each opponent chooses a permanent they control of each permanent type and sacrifices the rest. Whew, that's a mouthful. So with Liliana, you could drop her for 6 and -4 her, and everybody has to sack 2 creatures. Well, if Negan's on your field and you had enough creatures to leave him on the field, if you have 3 opponents and they each sack 2 creatures, you just ramp by 6, so you essentially cast Liliana for free. This is definitely a very good exchange. And then for each of the creatures that you sack with her negative, because you also have to sacrifice creatures, her static effect lets you draw 2 cards. So you draw 2 cards, play her for free, because you get your mana back because of Negan. Definitely a good combination of cards to have in that deck. But let's talk about her static effect. That's where you're going to get your card draw. Well, most of your card draw. The static effect for Liliana is whenever you sacrifice a creature, you're drawing a card, right? So, of course, the typical culprits for this is going to be Midnight Reaper for 2 and a black, 3/2 Zombie Knight. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, Midnight Reaper deals 1 damage to you and you draw a card. So whenever you're sacking any non-token creatures, will that matter? Of course. Will you find yourself in a state where you're sacking tokens instead of non-token creatures? Potentially. It all depends on how you build the deck, of course. But another one would be Grim Haruspex. 2 generic and a black for a 3/2 human wizard. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, draw a card. So this one lets you draw without taking the life. And it also has morph for a black. So you pay 3 mana, you play it face down as a 2/2, and then you pay 1 black and you can morph it face up at any time. That typically doesn't come up too often when it comes to Grim Haruspex. But let's talk about what you're going to be doing that will actually win you the game. You're sacking a lot of creatures. You got a lot of creatures coming into play. The biggest thing that you're going to be running is effects like Zulaport Cutthroat. 1 and a black for a 1/1 human rogue ally. Whenever Zulaport Cutthroat or another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. That's pretty cut and dry. And it doesn't seem powerful, but it's the ability of the aristocrats to be able to drain life like this that actually gets people. Until they get to a point where they can flood the board and swing in for the win. These abilities, they don't seem like much. 1 damage. Okay, I've got 40 life. But if your opponent's sacrificing 3, 4, 5, 6 creatures a turn, that adds up. Another card similar to this would be Cruel Celebrant. White and a black for a 1/2 vampire. Whenever Cruel Celebrant or another creature or planeswalker you control dies, each opponent loses 1 and you gain 1. So basically Cruel Celebrant is Zulaport Cutthroat on steroids. Next one, this one actually came out not too long ago. It was, I believe, Icoria. Bastion of Remembrance is 2 and a black for an enchantment. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you create a 1/1 soldier token. So a human soldier token. Whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So again, these are pretty much aristocrat staples at this point. There's nothing really new going on in this that you haven't already heard of. Other cards that you definitely want to consider, because you want to have your opponent sacrificing as much as possible. Plague Crafter is 2 and a black for a 3/2 human shaman. When Plague Crafter enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. Each player who can't discards a card. Now, after a certain point, this is where you get into hand destruction. Because what you're going to do is you're going to play the Plague Crafter. Each opponent sacrifices a creature, but you also have to sacrifice a creature. However, Plague Crafter can sacrifice himself. This is the cool thing with Plague Crafter, because you can recur Plague Crafter over and over and over and over again, as long as you sacrifice himself to his own trigger. And then after a point, when your opponents run out of creatures, they're discarding cards. Now you're up on. Now you have all the card advantage. Definitely something that you have to remember. You have to think about these things. Living Death, like I said, you don't really necessarily have to worry about board wipes, but Living Death is just a really, really good card for an Aristocrats deck. You're going to be running more creature heavy. You're going to be sacrificing your creatures. So if your opponents only have 2-3 creatures in their graveyard and you've got 10, a Living Death is going to be really good, because 3 generic and 2 black for a sorcery. Each player, basically, you sacrifice your whole field, and then everything in your graveyard comes back out onto the field. Let me word that differently. So the cards that are in your graveyard get exiled. The cards in your field get sacrificed. The cards that got exiled come back to the field. If you do this in a way where you have no creatures, but all of your creatures are in the graveyard, that's a really fat Living Death for you. Also, it's a graveyard trigger. It depends on creatures dying, so, well, a lot of the cards depend on creatures dying. So a card like Teysa Karlov is probably going to be really good in this deck, obviously, because 2 generic, a white and a black for a 2/4 legendary creature, Human Advisor. If a creature dying causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. Creature tokens you control have Vigilance and Lifelink. So your tokens will get Vigilance and Lifelink with Teysa on the field. And she doubles death triggers. Some might be wondering, well, what good is that? Cruel Celebrant is a death trigger. Zulaport Cutthroat is a death trigger. So instead of draining the table for 1, you're now draining them for 2. And if you do that 6 times in a turn, you see where this can be a problem. It's now, what is that, 12 damage? That's 12. You gain 12, they lose 12. It can get out of hand. Oh, and I'm not 100% sure that this is authentic. However, somebody has apparently leaked that this card does exist. It is in the Secret Lair, although it doesn't show as a listing in the Secret Lair when you buy it. Supposedly, Lucille, which is Negan's bat from the show, exists in the card game now. It's 1 generic and a black for a legendary artifact equipment. It equips for 4. Equipped creature gets +2/+0 and has Menace. And whenever the equipped creature attacks a player, that player, the defending player, has to sacrifice a creature, and you create a 2/2 zombie token. So of course you're going to throw that on Negan, right? Just for flavor, because it is his bat. But he already has a bat in the artwork, so I say give it to another creature. But yeah, no, that would definitely be a card that would go in this deck for sure, if it does exist. Like I said, this is not 100% sure. Supposedly it got leaked. Somebody supposedly got hold of one of the Secret Lairs early and confirmed that Negan's bat, Lucille, is an actual card coming in the Secret Lair. Is this true? I don't know 100%. Like I said, I have not received a Walking Dead Secret Lair, so I don't know. But could it potentially be a thing? If you think back to the original Secret Lair product that came out at the end of last year, I believe. It was right before Christmas time. You got the Secret Lair, and then at the bottom of the box there was a stained glass artwork window, the stained glass window artwork wore the Spark Planeswalker altars. And they randomly came out, but nobody knew about them until last minute when they got to the door. So, is Lucille something like that potentially? It could be. Like I said, I am not 100% sure. If this is real, cool, I guess. Sounds like a pretty decent equipment. I mean, there's better equipment out there, but it's not horrible, and it produces zombie tokens for you. Why not? But yeah, this one was, honestly, in my opinion, Negan was pretty cut and dry as a Mardu Aristocrats commander. If there's any different ideas that you guys might have for this deck, let me know down in the comments below. Be civil, be kind. I don't want the comments section to be just blown up with hate about the secret lair. Like I said, this is done and gone. It's already a thing. It's neither here nor there. But for those of you that were interested in this being a deck and maybe looking at purchasing the secret lair and hope to build this deck whenever it comes to your door, let me know down in the comments below what you think. Is there anything that you would do different? Is there any cards that I missed? I mean, it is Mardu Aristocrats, so there's obviously a lot of cards that I missed, but is there any off-the-wall card that not a lot of people use for Aristocrats that you think that should be known? Let's say maybe a Mardu pet card for Aristocrats that not a lot of people use. Some form of secret tech. Let me know down in the comments below, and I will see you guys next video.